I first met her many years ago at a festival. I'm a professional artist, and I sell my work at festivals and conventions. She was being harassed by a creeper near my booth, and my friend who saw the whole thing offered for her to hide behind the booth with us. We were all girls in our early 20s, so I thought nothing of it. We quickly became friends, and she would visit me whenever I was selling art at nearby events. She would also help me out with work as well. I've met many amazing lifelong friends this way, and I thought she would be another good friend. I invited her over to my house for a tea party. I like very tame parties. After knowing her for over a year, all went really well, and she was so fun to be with around everyone. Then one day I got a call from her, crying and being incoherent. I could understand each word and sentence she said, but nothing she said made any sense together. It's hard to explain, but she kept just saying things that were grammatically correct but had no real information that was conveyed. I was immediately worried about her safety, and somehow got it through that she can stay over at my place, so she came over. In person, she explained a bit more, but it was still really hard to understand her. She said something about breaking her teeth and her family being toxic, so I thought she was probably being abused at home. Later, she revealed her teeth had nothing to do with her family, and it was actually because she had fainted from not eating and hit the floor, breaking her teeth. But her family wasn't starving her. They were worried about her not eating as well. She talked about being unhappy with her school life and wanting to find a job so she can move out of her toxic family's home. She never explained exactly why her family is toxic, just that it was, and I didn't want to question her too much. I came from a toxic family myself, so I felt nothing but sympathy for her. I figured her patchy story was simply because she was distressed. I let her stay for as long as she wanted, but she chose to only spend one night. Later she thanked me, and said she was surprised that I helped her when none of her closer friends did. I thought her so-called friends were just assholes, but I would soon find out why the hard way. From that evening on, she would frequently call me to talk about her troubles. All of them were confusing and hard to understand, but not as incomprehensible as the first call. I ended up staying on the phone with her for hours each time, comforting her and giving her advice, though it was a bit hard since she didn't make a lot of sense. All her troubles were vague, like, I saw my brother. Okay, but what did he do? He doesn't feel real. What does that even mean? I was starting to get frustrated because these calls were so long and frequent, and we'd just go in circles. I didn't even know what she was trying to say 90% of the time. Then she started just showing up at my house at random, without telling me. I'm a busy person with a lot of work, so I don't normally just have free time to hang out, but I always tell myself that it's to help a friend in need, whatever her vague issues were. She would bring a lot of gifts each time as thanks, despite me telling her to not waste her money on me, since she had said that she wanted to move out and needed a way to save up. Sometimes I would spend the weekend with my boyfriend at the time, and she would wait outside my apartment, then leave a gift at the door without ever telling me. It was weird, but I just figured that was her way of showing thanks and that I should appreciate it. This all goes on for about a year. One day I was celebrating another friend's birthday when she texted me sounding suicidal. I called her, but the signal was bad, so only text could go through. She was starting to say crazy shit, like there was no way I could actually be nice to her, and that I must be faking it so that I can laugh at her behind her back. I was really hurt by this, because I spent so much time trying to help her, and out of nowhere she calls me a fake. I ask her why she thinks that, and she explains it's because I'm dating a guy. Apparently, she had got it in her head that I'm a lesbian. I'm not, and she never mentioned herself being one either. So dating a guy makes me a liar, and therefore I'm lying about helping her. At that point, my phone was dying, and I tell her that. I also tell her she needs to see a medical professional, because I can't help her at all anymore. She says it's proof that I'm a fake person, and a bunch of other negative stuff. My phone dies, and I try to enjoy the rest of my friend's birthday, since whatever's wrong with her is beyond what I can handle. About a month later, I haven't heard from her at all, when without warning she's ringing at my doorbell. After that last text conversation, I didn't want to deal with her anymore, so I just pretended that I wasn't home. As expected, she left a gift bag by my door, which I could see through the peek hole. I didn't go out to get it, and after about 10 minutes the door rang again. I felt that something was off, so I stayed by the door and looked out. She would move the gift bag and go hide somewhere, then adjust the location of the bag and ring the doorbell while hiding again. She did this for an hour, all while texting me saying she did see a doctor, so she's all better now, and I should just open the door. I kept thinking if I just pretend I'm not home, that she'll really leave this time. But she didn't. Then I suddenly saw her hand come up and cover the peek hole so I couldn't see out anymore. That freaked me out so much, I frantically texted my other friends for help, and they told me to call the cops, so I did. The police arrived in 5 minutes and asked her to leave. She lies to their face, saying that there's been a misunderstanding, that I had invited her over to hang out because we're friends. Good thing the police already knew my side of the story, because she's a small and innocent-looking girl, and could have fooled anyone. They tell her to leave again and told her that I specifically did not want her and did not invite her. She lies again, but more crazy this time. She says she's from Nebraska, where friends just visit each other without invitations. The police tell her this is California, so she can't exactly do that. They finally escorted her away before I opened the door and thanked them. After that, I didn't hear from her for a year, until I announced to my online followers of my art that I would be at the same festival that I met her at. She leaves a comment under my post, saying she'll come stalk me again, her exact words. She said it as if it was a funny joke, like haha, she's definitely not a stalker, and how silly it was of me to have thought that. I was really stressed out, because she's clearly unstable, and who knows if she'll get worse. I contacted the cops and had my BF tell her sternly to leave me alone, or we'd call the police. She acted very offended, like she was just a nice girl, and wanted to know why we were being so mean to her. Thankfully, that was the last I heard from her, and it's been 2 years since. Now I know why none of her other friends offered to help her when she first came to me. I wish they had warned me, too. One summer long ago, I worked for a house painting company made of many small franchises, preying on college students for underpaid and overworked employees. Said indentured servants/workforce generally returned to school in late August, and the franchise would close until the next summer. I was a lackey who hired everyone, formed crews, met with customers, transported materials, and the like. AKA my boss's job, but he preferred, not doing it. Late in the summer, my boss decided to continue into the fall months so he could make a bit more money while depriving me even further of the will to live. So I had to hire people who were in the painting business, but for whatever reason couldn't find a job with a reputable company, and had no option but to work with us. Yay. Enter Jim. Jim was a veteran, about 45 years old, which was far above my usual 18 to 22 hiring demographic, but he had impressed me over the phone. As I was essentially painting entire houses myself, or with a skeleton crew until I could scrounge up more workers, I didn't interview him in person. Just told him to show up ready to go and to meet me and a crew at a new job site 9 a.m. on Monday. Life happens, as it does, and I had a family emergency that prohibited me from being there on that Monday. Some of my summer workers who didn't go off to school would be there, so I texted them explaining them to help Jim get used to the way we worked, and to make sure to keep it all basic. If he was having trouble, send him home, and he'd start over with me there the next day. At 9:45 a.m., my phone is blown up with texts and calls. I'm not awake, but I slip outside to hiss into the phone. I'm staring at a dead family member, and you know this. What do you need? Jim isn't okay. What do you mean? He's fucking insane. He's ruining this person's roof, and he won't listen to us. He keeps screaming at us to shut the fuck up. Well, I thought Jim had a point with the last part, since my crew spent more time talking than painting. But I digress. In their infinite wisdom, my crew stuck this new dude up on the roof to paint a teeny space, which would take about 5 minutes with a brush. Homeboy pulls out a 9-inch roller and goes to town, swooping the thing up and down like a skateboarder on a halfpipe, so the entire black roof area below him is covered in beige paint. I tell them to get him down immediately and send him home. I'll deal with it after the wake. I tell my boss what's going on. He brushes it off, saying that Jim called him to apologize, and to tell him he could bring his cousin, Oscar, a guy who's apparently worked as a painter in a union, to the next job. The boss doesn't consult me at all. Says it's fine and I have to deal with it. Oh, great. It's a new job site and a new day. I still hate my life. Oscar isn't in a union, but he did work as a painter for over a decade, until he was put in jail for armed robbery, a jail stint that he was fresh out of as of a week ago. To Oscar's credit, he was very polite, respectful, and deferent. I had asked to speak with him alone before I let him set foot on my job site, and he was completely upfront about his jail time and what led to it, answering any and all questions that I had. I was pretty convinced, and he did do an excellent job. My boss stopped by for the first time in forever, and was also impressed by Oscar. So impressed that he decided Oscar and Jim would take on a job by themselves, a job that was mostly trim work for a family of mom, pop, and 3 daughters, 15, 11, and 7. He also decided that he would take care of all the customer interaction, with the exception of me dropping off the extra tall ladder halfway through, to reach one ridiculously small but very high place. Halfway through the job, about 2 days in, I show up like a good peon, massive ladder in tow. Jim is listening to music, and I see Oscar furtively look at him, then wave to me to keep driving and park around the corner. I love me some drama. I don't care about anything anymore, so I do. Oscar sprints directly to my car, and tells me that Jim has been making the owners and their daughters very uncomfortable, and my boss has been ignoring their calls. Oscar had told them to privately wait until the day I came, and he would make sure that I talked to them to help. I thanked Oscar and told him I would deal with it right then, and requested he hang around and proceed as if everything is fine, just in case I needed his assistance in any capacity. I pulled into the driveway, nodded at Jim, and knocked on the door. I was pulled in almost immediately by a frantic and hot mother. The family was Russian, so I was treated to a deluge of information that I could mostly understand, but the rest made me think Red from OINTB found out that I didn't like her food. Apparently Jim had been very opportunistic about his ladder positions as he worked on the second floor of the house, and they were conveniently always able to see directly into the girls' bedrooms, which he took pictures of on his phone. He also made multiple comments to the girls as they came home from school that were a sizable step over the line of pedophilia. A freaking football field past the line of how you speak to a customer or their kids, period. Massively inappropriate, sexual innuendos, the whole creeper works. I managed to keep myself from melting into the floor, and promised them that this would be dealt with immediately. With that, I walk out to confront Jim. I ask if I can use his phone because mine was dead, and after he hands it over, I find almost 100 pictures of the various bedrooms from every angle possible, even zoomed in. He sees me open the pictures from his position on the ladder and starts flying down, screaming at me. He launches at me, and Oscar puts himself in between us, yelling at Jim to calm down. Jim panics and flees for his car, leaving his phone with me. The police were called, and I handed the phone over. I was interviewed, and poor Oscar almost had a panic attack, but they said they would work with the family and take it from there. Great. I finished the job with Oscar, we get tipped, and the family thanked us for our role in helping them, as they didn't really know how to handle what Jim was doing. Time passes, and I'm home binge-watching TV in the living room. It's about 9 p.m. Light floods the room suddenly, as a car pulls up my neighbor's driveway with its brights on. I don't particularly care, so I continue watching TV. After a few minutes pass, I hear yelling from my neighbor's house. I look out the window, and it's Jim's car in their driveway, because my boss had given him my home address as to where to pick up the checks at the end of each week. He got confrontational, yelling at the neighbors about where I was at, when really all he had to do was turn around to see my idiot slack-jawed face staring out the window about 6 feet away. He then pulled out a handgun and started motioning at the wife. Before I can even register this actually happening, or go grab my own gun, which I would have heroically used to shoot myself in the foot or something, my living room is filled with red and blue lights, as multiple police cars pull up and consequently arrest Jim. Jim had 4 guns in the passenger seat of his car, one of which was an AR-15, and another a shotgun. Apparently, he had only taken out one to wave over his head, leaving the other 3 in the car because he wasn't 100% sure which house was mine. My neighbors are elderly, nosy, and snarky, and call the cops on anything of little to no consequence. They called as soon as his beater car pulled up in their driveway, and their knee-jerk 911 reaction likely saved my life. Let's not meet again, Jim. Also, you suck at painting. I've posted in this forum before, but I wanted to share this stalking situation I've dealt with for years. First, a little background. This began when I was 19, and continued for several years after that. I'm a male, which I suppose matters in this story. When I was in high school in my first year of college, I worked at a local grocery store part-time. I did everything. Bagging groceries, stocking shelves, cashiering, working at the service desk. Toward the end of my time there, I was doing more stuff in the front of the store, mainly the service desk since I'd been there forever, or sometimes cashiering. Anyway, it was just a small little grocery store, so we'd always have regulars. Many of the same customers would come in a lot, and we'd talk with them and get to know them. I was also very young and naive at the time, and thus pretty overly trusting. This would prove to be to my detriment. There was this one guy who would come in about once a week, sometimes maybe twice, and I'd been his cashier quite a few times. Eventually, he started standing in my line even if the other lines were shorter. It wasn't so unusual. I hated working in retail, but I was damn good with the customers, and I was very well liked. The only odd thing was that generally the people who would do this were older, 60s or 70s at least, and were usually ladies. This was a guy who had to be, at most, in his mid-40s. But whatever. I didn't think much of it. His name was Jeff. I didn't know his name for a long time because he always paid with cash. But when I finally learned what it was in one of the worst ways you can think of. We'll get to that. At first, though, Jeff was pretty harmless. He would chat me up, and if we didn't have a line, we'd usually talk for a bit. He seemed pretty interested in me and my life, but again, this wasn't so unusual, apart from his age mostly, but I just went with it. Jeff would ask me things about myself. Innocent questions, or so I thought at the time. He'd ask me stuff like what college I went to, and I'd tell him because I had no reason not to. At one point, he brought up cars and he asked which one was mine. The parking lot was clearly visible through the large windows at the front of the store, and I stupidly pointed up at my car and said, "It's that one." We all lived in a small area, and a lot of times by talking with customers, we'd realize we lived near each other or something, so I didn't think much of it when he asked me where I lived. I told him the name of the town, which was adjacent to the city the store was in, and then when he asked where in that town I lived, I told him my street, and then described my house like a total idiot. I like to think I'm a smart guy in most situations, but that was just not the case in this one. I didn't realize it at the time, but Jeff was systematically gathering information about me. By the time I realized what was happening, it was far too late. I had told him everything short of giving him my cell phone number or my actual address. One day I was working the service desk when Jeff came in, and he wanted me to ring his groceries up. I was busy selling lottery or a money order to a customer or something. I can't really remember specifically, so I told him that I couldn't. He got this look on his face, like he hated the fact that I had told him no, but it was just for a second, and then he was smiley again. I didn't really talk to him much because, I was with a customer, and Jeff just stood there staring at me. I didn't really notice at first because whatever machine I was using, lottery or money order, again I can't remember, was giving me a hell of a time. Eventually the customer pointed it out. "That guy keeps staring at you." And that's when I looked over at him. He wasn't smiling but looked angry instead. But the moment I looked at him, the smile was immediately back on his face. Then Jeff said something about me wearing a skirt. Now this wasn't the kind of humor he had exhibited before, and was totally out of nowhere, so it gave me pause. I just kind of looked back at him as he went on about how I'd look in a skirt or a dress, just staring at him with a total what the fuck expression on my face. The more he talked about it, the more unnerved I became. Another coworker, Miranda, was in the service center with me, and she and the customer, as well as another nearby cashier, were all giving him what I presume were the same identical expressions. He wasn't stopping, so I realized I had to say something to make him stop, and I couldn't even pretend to be humored by it when I told him. "I don't know what you're talking about. You'll never see me in anything but this uniform." My tone was dead serious, and he knew I wasn't amused. The smile was gone, and I saw something on his face that I had never seen before. It was anger, yes, but it was also humiliation, and he did not like it one bit. He glared at me with a look that I felt in my bones, that rushed through me like a cold chill. My breath caught in my throat as we just stared at each other. I don't even know how to explain it, other than to say this was the most menacing way anyone has ever looked at me. With that look, he was saying, "You'll be sorry. I'm sure of it." Maybe I wasn't at the time, but in hindsight. Without another word, he turned and walked away. After that, whenever Jeff would come into the store, he never stood in my line, which was fine with me. However, he would always loudly talk about me from other registers and glare at me. He would badmouth me, but not in such an overt way where we could really do much about it. Sometimes he wouldn't even refer to me by my name, but we all knew he was talking about me. Sometimes at night I would be the only cashier at the front as we approached closing time. Another would be in the office counting the drawers for the day, while the manager and other workers were usually in the back or throughout the store stocking shelves or cleaning. In the evenings, when I was more or less alone, I would notice the same car pull into the parking lot, but the driver never came in. The main defining feature of this car was the fact that one of the headlights was burnt out. Because of the previously mentioned large windows, everyone in the parking lot could look into the store right at me. It took me longer than I'm proud of to realize what was happening here, and the only way I realized who was in the car was by chance. My car was in the shop, so my mom picked me up from work when I was done, and as I was waiting for her to get there outside in front of the building, I was able to see into the car away from the bright lights of the store. Sure enough, it was Jeff. My shock was palpable, and that was when I truly realized that something was very, very not right about all this. I actually backed away in fear and kept imagining what I would do if he got out of the car. The door inside had locked behind me, and while there were people in the store still, they weren't in the front. But luckily, that was when my mom got there. I didn't tell her because I knew my story would only worry her. Everyone at the store knew about Jeff before long, and it got so bad that when he would come inside, everyone would instantly tell me to go into the back, and they would page me overhead when he left. Everyone, even the managers. We all knew, and we were all creeped out. A lot of times when he would come in, and when he didn't see me, he would leave immediately. I remember once we didn't notice him walking in, and by the time we realized he was almost at the doors. Another cashier, Laura, saw him and looked scared. Now Laura wasn't easily rattled, but this guy had us all on edge, mostly because we were afraid of his weird fascination with me. She urged me frantically to hurry and run to the back. I hadn't noticed him just yet and was confused. I started to ask her why, but before I could finish, she said, "Just go." I clearly remember this moment, these few seconds between the time she said that and the time I saw him walking through the door, where I realized what was happening. Jeff saw me before I rushed into the back, and I was so unnerved that I locked the back door of the loading dock, worried he'd come looking for me back there. When she was gone, Laura had called me back up, and she just couldn't even say anything. She told me that he gave her a furious look and then stormed out of the store, and I remember being worried he would retaliate against her. Luckily, he never did. Things got worse. I began seeing Jeff around the town, like when I would go to movies, to various stores, gas stations, the mall, and even the bank once. Just a couple of these times might be a coincidence, but this was happening a lot. Plus it was Jeff, so I knew it was much more than that. I had no proof that he was stalking me at this point, and still didn't tell my parents. At the time, while I was still in college, I lived at home and commuted to school, and I would often be there until after dark. There were times when I would pull out of the school parking lot, and very shortly after that, I'd see a car behind me with just one headlight. Once or twice, again, could be a weird coincidence, but this was happening at least once a week. I still didn't tell my parents, even though I was pretty sure it was him. Then one night, when I was walking out of the school into the naturally dark and deserted parking lot, I saw a car parked in an empty part of it with the lights off. I didn't think anything of it, until the lights came on, and there was only one headlight. I knew it was him, and I sprinted to my car, threw my shit into it, and got the hell out of there. After that, I started walking out with either security guards or friends when I could, and a couple of times I thought I saw his car, but he never put his lights on unless I was alone. He would never approach me or drive toward me during those times. It was like he was taunting me. It was like he just wanted me to know that he was there, and that he knew how to find me. This continued even after I quit working at the store. I became a tutor at school instead, but his stalking, because that's what it was, I knew for sure now, didn't cease. Once I was at a friend's house after dark, and then I drove home. I was almost there when I realized I had forgotten something. Instead of pulling around in the driveway, I was just going to loop around the street because it was easier, so I drove past my house. This particular night I was home alone. Both my siblings lived elsewhere and my parents were out, so the house was dark. There shouldn't have been anyone in the driveway, because I had just spoken to my parents, and they were nowhere near home. But when I drove by, I saw the dark shape of a car and taillights. Sometimes people turned around in our driveway because it was big. I thought maybe that's what it was, or maybe someone had had some car trouble. But then the car pulled out of the driveway after me, and I looked in my rear-view mirror and saw it. The car only had one headlight. This fucker was at my house, and he had been waiting for me. He followed me for a while and I couldn't go home, and I also didn't want to lead him to any of my friends, so I drove back to the store I used to work at, rushed inside and looked out the windows to see if he followed me. Miranda was working that night and asked me what was going on. I couldn't even speak. All I could do was look at her, and she knew. Her eyes got wide, and she couldn't speak either. After that, Jeff began following me a lot more. He'd be at my school more often, and it was like he knew my exact schedule. He knew where I'd be and when I'd be there. I saw him so often, I shudder thinking about the times that I didn't see him, but when he had to be there somewhere. It wasn't just my schedule he learned. He knew my parents too, to some extent, at least when I would be home alone. A few times I'd hear a car pull into the driveway at night, and I knew it was him before I even looked. But he never got out of his car, that I could see at least. He would only stay for about 10 minutes or so. Mainly this would be on Wednesday or Saturday nights when my parents would be at church, and I began avoiding the house at these times, either staying at school to study, or hanging out with friends, or going to the movies or something. At the time, I would occasionally babysit for someone at my parents' church, but during this time, I eventually stopped, afraid that he would follow me there. I decided I needed to look into this guy. At the time, I didn't even know this guy's name, but something told me to look at the sex offenders database, so one day while at my friend Jill's house, I did just that. We looked at various pictures of nearby sex offenders and discovered the shocking amount of them in the vicinity. Eventually, one small thumbnail of the pictures caught my eye. It was hard to tell if it was him, so I clicked on it to bring up a larger picture and more information about the man. Jill's internet was crap, so the page loaded slowly. His name came up first. It was Jeff. Jill and I waited for the picture to load, and as it slowly came into view, I stopped breathing for a second, because it was him. That's how I learned his name, and that's how I learned that the man who was stalking me was a sexual predator. I didn't know what to do with this information. Thus far, he hadn't done anything illegal per se, but I knew I needed to tell my parents, so I told them everything. They were shocked, to say the least. They had no idea. Jeff was good at hiding his activities, which makes me think he wasn't just not very stealthy with me, that I didn't catch him so often because he sucked at being subtle. No. Jeff wanted me to know that I was being watched, that I was the object of his obsession, so I told him everything. My dad was angry. I swear if he knew where Jeff was, he would have gone to threaten him to leave me alone or something. My mom was just scared. Really scared. She even cried. We briefly discussed calling the police, but again, Jeff hadn't actually broken the law other than maybe trespassing, but I couldn't prove it was him. All I could do was be vigilant. I thought I would feel better when they knew, but I felt worse. However, they needed to know. Everyone in my life needed to know, so they did. We started taking precautions. By this point I was in my 20s, but I still felt like a child. I didn't have a curfew per se, but my parents were hesitant to leave me alone, even during the day. My dad's normally not easily rattled, which is why it was so unnerving to see him shaken up by this. We started keeping the cats inside, and when the dogs were out, we wouldn't let them out of our sight. More than a few times, I remember sitting out on the back steps after letting them out to keep an eye on them, and feeling like I was being watched. By this point, I never felt comfortable, never felt safe, so it might have just been paranoia, but I don't know. My mom also got me some pepper spray, and I would carry it with me at all times when I was out of the house. At night, I would take a knife to bed. Jeff didn't stop. I remember one time I was at a friend's apartment, and while she was in the bathroom, her front door started rattling like someone was trying to open it. Luckily it was locked, and before she even got out of the bathroom it had stopped. I didn't tell her at first because she wouldn't be spending the night there, so she wouldn't be alone. After that I stopped going to friends' houses. I stopped going anywhere if I could help it, especially alone. And this went on for years. I was out of college and it was still happening. For at least 5 years this went on. When I moved into my first place on my own, I was scared, but I'd been seeing him less and less, and I didn't want to live with my parents forever. Things went fine mostly, and there would be weeks and then months in between Jeff sightings. Then one day I saw him at the store, and I left right away not wanting him to see me. I didn't think he did, and made a few more stops before heading home, and that's when I realized I shouldn't let myself get complacent in this situation. I always made sure my doors and windows were locked when I wasn't home. And even then, especially at night, or if I just had a bad feeling. I've been doing this since even before the Jeff situation began, so that was how I knew there was no way I had left my front door not only unlocked, but slightly open. This wasn't right, and I should have called the police, but I was feeling brazen. I think I was so tired of feeling like I wasn't in control, that I was trying to take the situation back into my own hands, so I readied my pepper spray and headed inside. I went into the kitchen and grabbed a knife, and I went around my place and checked every closet, under every bed. I checked everywhere someone could be remotely hiding, but nobody was there. That was a truly terrifying experience. I kept expecting him to pop out of some hiding place or something, but he didn't. Jeff wasn't there. I still couldn't sleep there that night, though, and I didn't want anyone to know, so I got a hotel room that night. For a long time, I never told anyone about this incident, because this was a clear line that Jeff had crossed. I had no proof that it was him, but I know that it was him. I never called the police, though, because nothing was missing, and there were no signs that anyone had broken in. I knew, though, that he had been there. I just felt him. It scares me to wonder what would have happened if I'd been home when he got there. Unless you've been through something like this, you can't know what it's like to go through this sort of experience, how it wreaks havoc on your psyche, how it shatters your trust and sense of safety. There are things you don't really notice until they're ripped away from you. There's this feeling of security that I've lost, and I don't think I'll ever get it back again. It's been years since I've seen or heard from Jeff, though I still live in the area. I have no idea if he's still watching me. Most of the time I think he's moved on or been jailed for something else, but every once in a while, I'll be in a parking lot or home alone, and I just get that feeling, the one I've come to associate with him. Maybe it's just the paranoia, a gift that Jeff gave me the day he talked about me wearing a dress. I hope that's all it is, but sometimes I wonder. It's all just a part of my life now. I don't talk about it much, but everyone in my life knows about it. It's like the elephant in the room. I've changed a lot since then. I've got anxiety issues and I'm extremely private. I'm not sure it's all because of this, but it's at least a factor. I'm still cautious. I still don't go out alone after dark. I still lock my doors and windows whether or not it's nighttime and whether or not I'm home alone. I lock the bathroom door every time I shower. I check the locks at least 3 times before going to sleep. I feel nervous if anything's out of place at my apartment, or if I can't find something that should be in a particular place but isn't. I still carry that pepper spray with me even during the day, and I still take a knife to bed with me.